The ship jolted with a guttural groan as the USV Brightline cut through the dead weight of the neutral sector, its battered frame creaking against the cold vacuum pressing at its seams. In the narrow hallways, the low hum of emergency lights flickered against the walls patched with hastily welded metal. Everywhere the ship bled desperation. Makeshift medical stations sprawled across cargo bays, IV drips tied to ceiling beams, civilians moaning under thermal blankets turned gauze. Nurses and medics worked with the ferocity of cornered animals. Blood caked their gloves, staining the floors in thick smears. Overhead, the ventilation struggled, coughing rhythmic pulses of stale, recycled air. The smell was thick, blood, disinfectant, sweat, and it clung to every surface like a second skin. Children whimpered from behind partitioned cargo crates. The elderly muttered fevered prayers into the thin air. In the medical bay, Dr. Jonah Carr wiped a shaking hand across his forehead, smearing a line of grease into the sweat, and leaned over a stretcher holding a young boy. "Pressure! Keep pressure there," he barked hoarsely to Nurse Linnea Tedessa, whose hands trembled as she pressed a compress against the child's side. The ship vibrated again, subtly, ominously, as if dreading what was about to come. Then, the silence snapped. The sensors screamed to life first, a shrill, needling alarm that cut through the din like a scalpel. On the bridge, Officer Pierce Tsukino cursed under his breath, fingers flying across the cracked console. He barely had time to confirm the blip before the main screen burst into a fractured image. Ships, sleek, sharp-edged, and low against the blackness, emerging from folded space. Vargul. Their vessels were angular and skeletal, with hulls that seemed to pulse faintly under their own bioluminescent armor. The creatures themselves were a grotesque blend of smooth skin and ridged protrusions, with small tentacles twisting idly from their chins and their fingers ending in flexible, dexterous appendages. They wore armor made of stitched black hides and metallic plates, etched with bone-white markings, an aesthetic of war and ritual brutality. The first shots came without warning. The Brightline shuddered violently as focused plasma tore through its external propulsion fins, severing thrust vectors and sending the vessel drifting helplessly. Shield indicators blared red and died. Another volley cracked the aft hull, rupturing a maintenance bay into the void. Screams erupted from that sector, quickly silenced. Captain Banuk Ires's voice, guttural and mocking, barked across the emergency comms, broadcasted through the ship with cruel clarity. "Enjoy the void, little healers. We'll return to pick apart what's left." Static swallowed his laughter as the Vargul ships folded away, leaving the Brightline bleeding and alone. Inside, the chaos was immediate. Patients spilled from secured cots as gravity faltered. Doctors screamed orders over the alarms, and wounded stumbled through narrow corridors trailing blood. A frantic scramble began in the comms bay, where Communications Officer Bram Kent struggled to route a distress beacon through the battered array. "We've got partial comms!" Bram shouted over the roar of the failing systems. Sparks rained from an overhead conduit, lighting the room in erratic flashes. Nurse Tadesse gripped a support beam, her face pale, whispering, "No one's coming. Not out here." All eyes on the bridge turned toward the main console where the emergency beacon stuttered weakly into the void. There was a crushing finality to the realization. No fleets, no guardians, just the endless quiet of dead space. The lights flickered once, briefly plunging the bridge into a sickly half-darkness. A muffled sob broke from somewhere in the room. The ventilation ducts groaned under the strain, their metallic wheeze almost drowning the heartbeat silence. From the shadowed corner of the bridge, a figure moved. Colt Redhawk had been there the entire time, sitting silent, eyes half-lidded, as if napping through the chaos. He stood now, slow and deliberate, the heavy thud of his boots grounding him against the ship's uncertain sway. His clothes were functional, a dark canvas jacket scarred at the seams, plain gray trousers, combat boots worn down at the soles. No rank, no insignia. Yet something in the way he moved, the stillness of a loaded gun waiting for a trigger, cut through the rising hysteria like a razor. His face was weathered, his skin tanned by years under harsh suns, his eyes sharp slivers of gray steel. He stepped to the shattered central console. The bridge crew parted instinctively, as though caught in a tide. "Until they get back," Colt said, his voice low, almost conversational against the shriek of sirens. "We'll be dead." The words froze the room. He leaned over the main panel, tapping through damage reports with detached precision, as if reviewing a shopping list. His finger jabbed at schematics of the ship, the medical bays, the oxygen systems, the maintenance bots. "They'll be back. We act now or we die," Colt said, without raising his voice. Tsukino, struggling to process, blurted out, "What do you mean, act? We're doctors, nurses. We can't fight." Colt didn't look up. "You can survive," he said, "if you listen." He turned, eyes cutting through the bridge crew like an autopsy scalpel. Then he pointed. "Power relays. Strip the backup regulators. You two," he nodded at Bram Kent and another tech, Jared Sloan. "Get every medical bot reprogrammed. Prioritize proximity detonation. Bypass safety inhibitors." A beat of stunned silence. Then, slowly, they moved. Colt stepped over to the emergency toolkit bolted under the captain's station, ripping it open with a quick twist of a combat knife pulled from his boot. "I need every length of flexible conduit, plasma couplings, and whatever unstable isotopes you've got hidden in the waste tanks." No one dared argue. Even Dr. Carr, sweat dripping from his chin, stared at Colt with a mixture of fear and awe. Outside, beyond the ruptured hulls, the stars spun slowly, and somewhere out there, the Vargal ships waited, sharpening their knives. Within the Brightline, under Colt's cold direction, chaos shifted. It bent. It conformed. The battered bots, once tasked with stitching wounds, were wheeled into a side corridor. Colt knelt, his fingers moving with unsettling speed, rerouting servo motors to power unstable plasma injectors. Nearby, Bram and Jared spliced a tangle of medical tubing into the oxygen ducts, fashioning brutal pressure spikes capable of tearing flesh. Nurse Tadessa, still trembling, passed Colt a power coupling she salvaged from a ruined console. He took it with a nod, securing it to a repurposed stasis pod, now brimming with volatile gas, connected to a rudimentary tripwire rig. The sounds inside the ship changed. The alarm still screamed, the wounded still groaned. But beneath it, a new rhythm emerged. Clinks of tools, hissing vents, the soft whir of bots reprogramming for death. Colt worked methodically, directing with curt hand signals, his voice only raised when absolutely necessary. Every movement was deliberate, surgical. Dr. Carr, watching from across the bay, whispered to Tadessa, "Who the hell is he?" Tadessa could only shake her head. At the main airlock, a team of engineers, civilians who had never held a weapon, now welded shards of metal into jagged barriers. Every corridor became a killing field, every hatch a trap, every vent a hidden dagger. In the distance, from somewhere deep within the ship's wounded frame, a faint new sound reverberated through the bones of the Brightline. The Vargal were coming back. Colt tightened the last coupling on a crude plasma cannon built from the ship's oxygen recycler. He rose slowly, dusted off his hands, and spoke without turning. Positions. The civilians moved, not as doctors or patients, but as soldiers, an army of the desperate, molded by one man's certainty. On the black canvas of space, the predators approached, oblivious. The Brightline waited, silent and still, its heart pounding with a new and terrible purpose. The hiss of severed conduits filled the main corridor as Colt Redhawk sliced through the oxygen line with a salvaged plasma cutter. Sparks flared in the low gravity, illuminating his face, expressionless, focused, as he adjusted the cut angle by a fraction, then redid it again, ensuring it was clean, perfect. Around him, the Brightline's battered hull shuddered with the occasional aftershock of failing systems. But he moved with a detached calm, of a surgeon mid-operation. The ship's interior, once sterile and utilitarian, transformed into something else under Colt's hands. Ducts normally used for life support twisted into brutal instruments of death. Medical bots, compact, white-shelled, with blinking green lenses and appendages designed for stitching tissue, were reprogrammed one by one. Colt's fingers moved over the maintenance interface, bypassing safeties, reconfiguring logic cores, rewiring gyros to destabilize into proximity mines. Jared Sloan hovered nearby, holding a toolkit awkwardly in both hands. "Are you sure this'll work?" he asked, voice cracking. Colt didn't look up. He tightened the final bolt on the reconfigured pressure spike embedded inside the duct, then gave a small nod. "Pressure will reach lethal force. First breach, it'll cut through armor before they hear it." Jared swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Colt and the gleaming line of bisturies arrayed like teeth inside the ventilation shaft. "Jesus," he whispered. Dr. Jonah Carr watched from the far end of the hall, stunned by the precision unfolding in front of him. Nearby, Nurse Linnea Tadesse adjusted the settings on a medical bot Colt had repurposed. The tiny machine blinked its innocent green eye at her as she armed it with a sliver-thin shrapnel charge disguised beneath its chassis. "How do you even think of this?" she murmured, half to herself. Colt glanced up briefly, his voice low, almost conversational. "You don't think. You remember." He moved on, tapping the side of a stasis pod with 2 fingers. The pod's surface gleamed under the emergency lighting, its medical readouts still scrolling vital signs that were long gone. Inside, he planted a volatile chemical pack, rigged to detonate if tampered with. Officer Pierce Tsukino approached cautiously, wiping grime from his forehead. "Sir," he started, then caught himself. Colt wore no rank, no insignia. He adjusted awkwardly. "Colt, how do you know all this?" Colt paused, tightening the power coupling on another trap. For a moment, a flicker crossed his eyes. Something distant, raw. "Been places nobody talks about," Colt said simply, his tone closing the door on further questions. In the ship's engineering bay, Bram Kent cursed under his breath as he wrestled a heavy filtration conduit into place. Colt kneeled beside him without a word, tightening the mount, rerouting the flow regulators. The system, once designed to purify air for hundreds, now throbbed with unstable energy, converted into a crude but devastating plasma cannon. Tension clung to the air like static. Across the crew, reactions varied. Some, like Jared, fumbled and stared in horror. Others, like Tsukino and Tadesse, followed orders with grim focus. Every successful conversion brought another wave of disbelief. How a hospital ship could become a fortress under the right hands. Yet no one questioned Colt's directions now. The air itself seemed charged with the inevitability of violence. Down the hall, a group of young engineers huddled near a maintenance locker, whispering furiously. "Who is he?" whispered Ellis Souza, an apprentice technician barely out of training. "I heard he was a bounty hunter," said Miguel Artois, voice low and urgent. "Maybe ex-mercenary." "No way," Ellis muttered. "No merc I know works with that kind of precision." From his position across the corridor, Colt glanced toward them for a fraction of a second. The engineers fell silent instantly, their blood turning cold under his gaze. Colt continued without comment. He bent over a secondary access panel, stripping wires, rerouting bypass circuits, methodically checking each connection, and sometimes redoing an entire section until it was, by his standards, precise enough. His hands moved with the surety of someone who had done this countless times before, but whose every movement carried the weight of necessity, not routine. In the main cargo bay, Colt gathered the survivors, those able to stand and follow orders. He split them into teams, one for fortifying doors with repurposed surgical stretchers welded into barricades, another for laying down traps across choke points, another still for programming bots with terminal commands to detonate when proximity thresholds were crossed. He spoke little, gestures, short orders, Curt nods drove the action. "Tunnel them into the lower decks," Colt instructed Bram Kent, laying out a map of the Brightline. "Pinch points here, here, and here. Force them to spread thin." Bram, still wide-eyed, nodded quickly and rushed to relay the orders. All the while, beyond the cracked hulls and scorched metal, space remained silent. But the ship's patched-together radar system picked up the faint signatures flickering at the edge of sensor range. Tsukino hovered near the console, reading the contact reports aloud, his voice tightening with every line. "They're back," he announced grimly. "Multiple signatures, same drive profiles, Vargal." A shiver ran through the assembled crew. In the dimly lit mess hall, transformed into a command hub, Nurse Tedessa helped Colt calibrate the last set of bots. She handed him a small plasma igniter from a surgical torch. "You're setting all this up like you've done it before," she said, watching him work. Colt fitted the igniter into a secondary port, sealing it with steady hands. His voice was dry, almost absent. "There was a place," he murmured, eyes distant. "Cold, broken. No weapons left, just scraps. We held it for 6 days. Made everything we needed from what we could tear apart." Tedessa blinked. "Where?" Colt didn't answer. His fingers locked down the last seal, and he stood, wiping grime onto his jacket. The time for preparation was closing. In the auxiliary bay, Jared Sloan stared in stunned horror at the final rigged bot. Once a healing machine, now a mobile bomb humming quietly in standby mode. He turned to Bram. "This is insane," he hissed. "This is supposed to be a hospital ship." Bram, face pale but resolute, only shook his head. "It was. It's not anymore." Outside, the Vargal ships drifted closer, sleek predators slicing through the black, their grotesque forms barely visible against the stars. The creatures themselves prepared to board, arms flexing, tentacled fingers curling around plasma blades and pulse rifles. Their confidence was absolute. Inside the Brightline, Colt Redhawk watched the monitors calmly, arms folded across his chest. Around him, the corridors gleamed with deceptive quiet. Every hatch, vent, and passage a loaded spring waiting for the wrong footstep. He keyed the comm once, one short beep to signal readiness. The ship fell into stillness, broken only by the heavy breath of those hiding in the shadows, hearts hammering against ribs. The predators were coming, and the prey had learned how to bite. The first contact was silent. No weapons discharge, no warning scan. Just a shimmer along the starboard hull as the Vargal ships folded in from their faster-than-light trajectory, their sleek forms sliding like knives through the darkness. From his position inside the Brightline's auxiliary control bay, Colt Redhawk leaned slightly forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the flickering displays. The internal cameras showed nothing at first, just the prepped corridors, dormant bots, sealed stasis pods glowing faintly in the dark. Every corner was quiet, still. Then came the sound. Dull metallic clangs echoed through the outer hull, rhythmic and methodical. The Vargal boarding clamps latched on with segmented limbs, securing airtight grips. 4 breach points just as predicted. Colt said nothing. The invaders came in groups, 6 to a pod. Their forms spilled into the Brightline's corridors with a confidence sharpened by past bloodshed. Smooth-skinned and amphibious, the Vargal moved on reverse-jointed legs, their armor a patchwork of iridescent scales and jagged bone plating. Their elongated torsos flexed with inhuman grace, and from their lower jaws hung clusters of writhing, sensory tendrils that twitched with the scent of adrenaline and fear. They were armed for slaughter. Plasma scythes, shock carbines. A few carried slug launchers modified for rapid fire. They advanced like apex predators expecting no resistance, their breath hissing from the small vents at the base of their neck armor. "This place smells like rotten iron," one of them snarled through his rebreather. "No movement," another replied, sweeping his rifle across the darkened corridor. "They're dead or hiding." A third laughed. "Let's clean up what's left." Then came the first explosion. The medical bot resting beside the junction at corridor A2 blinked once, its single green eye flashing red, before it detonated in a burst of shrapnel and vaporized accelerant. 4 Vargul vanished in a flash of compressed light. The others screamed, disoriented, their armor shredded. One stumbled, only to be caught by a jet of bisturies that fired from a vent like a cloud of steel needles. His armor cracked, his tendrils twitched, then silence. Across the ship, the second group breached the D-ring access port and marched toward what had once been the neonatal recovery ward. They didn't notice the stasis pod. Its biometric panel flashed a faint red, showing flatlined vitals. Bait. As one of them leaned in, a low-frequency hum erupted. The pod imploded, releasing a burst of compressed plasma that seared through their midsection. 2 were killed instantly. The others stumbled into the adjacent corridor, only to trigger a tripline embedded in the flooring. Electricity surged up their spines. The walls pulsed red as power discharged through their weapons, igniting the ammunition packs they carried. Another feed blinked alive on Colt's monitor. Corridor C5. The Vargul squad there moved cautiously, disturbed now, no longer amused. One tapped into his wrist module. "Command, this place is rigged. It's..." The feed cut. Colt remained still. His fingers danced over the console, redirecting power to the makeshift plasma node inside the ship's air purification array. From his left, Bram Kent watched, pale and frozen. His lips moved, but no sound came out. In the belly of the ship, a third group advanced near the engineering core. One of them paused, his tendrils twitching. "They're watching us," he hissed. Ahead of them, the corridor stretched quiet and sterile. The walls gleamed under the emergency lights. The silence felt wrong. One Vargul took a step forward. The bulkhead slammed shut behind them, then another ahead, trapped. A moment of hesitation, then a screech of pain. The corridor's inner frame surged with energy. The makeshift discharge circuit Colt had threaded into the insulation fired. An arc of blue plasma filled the narrow space, consuming everything inside in a flash of flickering light. The last of them thrashed once, then nothing. Above them, in the orbiting flagship, Captain Banuk Ires stood at the forward observation deck, flanked by 2 sub-commanders. His pale blue skin glistened under the low red lighting, and his tendrils curled irritably. He watched the bright line's hull on the external view, waiting for the signals that would indicate completion of the sweep. Instead, the lights from the breached escotillas flickered erratically. Small flares danced along the docking points, like stars dying in miniature. "What the fuck is happening inside?" he growled, voice low. A moment later, his comms officer patched through a voice from one of the squads. The transmission buzzed with static and panic. "They are killing us, and we don't even know who..." The signal cut to a sharp tone. Banuk's jaw clenched. "Pull back." Too late. Camera feeds lit up again on Colt's screen. A final squad near the auxiliary cargo hold tried to retreat, pulling back through the emergency decontamination corridor. Colt waited. The corridor sealed itself, both ends slamming shut in a synchronized lockout. Bram's voice finally cracked through the silence beside him. They're trying to surrender." Colt didn't look away. His hand hovered briefly over the command pad. Then he activated the decontamination cycle. Inside the corridor, heat surged. The walls pulsed orange. The final Vargul raised his hands, dropped his weapon. A second later, the corridor filled with plasma vapor. From the flagship, Banuk watched as the last docking connection broke apart. A wave of energy surged from the bright-lined stern, controlled, focused, cutting through the docking clamps and vaporizing the boarding tube his own crew was still occupying. One of the sub-commanders gasped. Another turned away as the blast echoed through the ship's sensors. Then, a second beam, narrow and impossibly accurate, lanced out from the Brightline's portside maintenance array. A laser, once meant for surgical repair of hull fissures, now reconfigured into a kill weapon. The beam cut through the command shuttle that had been holding station near the Brightline's airlock, slicing the vessel clean in half. The bridge fell into stunned silence. On board the Brightline, Colt slowly removed his gloves, tossing them into a containment bin beside the console. He turned off the monitor. Tsukino arrived moments later, panting, eyes wide. "That was 10 minutes, he whispered. Colt looked at him, calm. Exactly. He picked up a rag from the edge of the console and wiped the dust off the plasma trigger's housing. No rush, no urgency, just maintenance. Farther down the corridor, Ellis Souza stood frozen in front of a viewport, watching the remains of the boarding ships drift among the stars. Bodies, some still glowing faintly, floated past in silence. Behind him, Nurse Tedessa knelt beside a small medical bot, hands trembling as she deactivated its improvised payload. She didn't speak. Souza blinked. His voice was quiet, numb. "We weren't supposed to win." No one answered. The Brightline held its silence. Every corridor, every chamber, every room bore the echo of precision. Not rage, not vengeance. Just the unrelenting, calculated response of a species that remembered how to survive with nothing but wire, grit, and fear, turned inward. The Vargal came expecting blood. Instead, they found discipline. The body slipped from the airlock with a slow rotation, vanishing into the void among dozens of others. Jared Sloan stood stiffly at the hatch controls, eyes fixed on the pale blue form tumbling into the dark, until a voice broke through the static of his thoughts. "Protocol of decontamination," Colt Redhawk said behind him. Tone even. "Do it clean. Move on." Jared nodded once, his face ashen, and turned to the next stretcher. Across the Brightline, the atmosphere was sterile again, not by design, but by effort. Blood had been scrubbed from the walls, scorch marks were buffed from the floors. Medical bots, no longer mines, hummed quietly as they scanned for damage. Stasis pods had been resealed. Emergency lights dimmed to operational levels. It looked like a hospital ship again, but the smell lingered. In the repurposed triage bay, Nurse Tedessa helped Ellis Souza patch a rupture along the wall. His hands moved slowly, distracted. "You think we went too far?" Souza asked, not looking up. Tedessa tightened a bolt and wiped her brow. "Too far for what? Survival?" She said one of them tried to surrender. "And?" Souza hesitated. "I don't know. Doesn't sit right." Tedessa didn't reply. She didn't need to. Farther down, Tsukino reviewed pressure levels near the fusion line with Bram Kent. Neither spoke much. Occasionally, their eyes drifted to the ceiling, where faint streaks still marked where improvised charges had burst. In the background, the soft hiss of air scrubbers and clink of tools filled the silence. Outside, in the emptiness beyond the hull, the bodies drifted in slow spirals, some whole, others not. Armor cracked, skin frostbitten. Vargal corpses rotated lazily between medical debris and pieces of scorched plating, a tableau of perfect silence. And in the distance, they were being watched. On the bridge of the Tsurhadi flagship Imakul, Commander Kesvel Orun leaned against the edge of the holopodium, his long six-fingered hands adorned with black calligraphy rings, each etched with house symbols of high protocol. His face, smooth, elongated, with sharply angled features and ash-gray skin, betrayed no urgency. From behind his thin, breathing veil, Orun's voice was calm and clipped. A distress signal from a human vessel, one of their medical units. Fleet strategist Tol Valdez stood nearby, clad in layered cobalt robes of stiff, geometric fabric. His posture was theatrical, spine straight, shoulders squared unnaturally. The small, glowing glyphs across his brow displayed active status, an affectation for court diplomacy rather than war. He barely glanced at the data feed. Another performance of desperation, Valdez muttered. And conveniently public. How human. Orun gave a shallow nod. Launch 2 diplomatic frigates with the Reshna transmitter. They want a savior. We'll give them a parade. Visual team? Orun gestured. Naturally. Set the framing from stern view. Make the human small, the ship large. Have Reshna focus on compassion tones. A small group of aides moved with precision behind them. Tall, symmetrical figures in stiff uniforms of teal and copper, their movements graceful and overly choreographed, like dancers trained to appear efficient. None looked toward the tactical feeds. Vadez arched a brow. How armed? Barely, Orun said. It's a hospital ship. Pity. Would have made an excellent backdrop for a disabling strike. The aides chuckled. The sound filtered through layered vocal masks. Reshna, their media operator, a junior envoy with obsidian skin and silver-irised eyes, leaned toward the console. Broadcast format? Live, Orun said, smoothing the front of his robe. Galactic Net. Feed the nobility channels first. Add the overlay. Emergency human recovery. Tsurhadi compassion in action. Reshna smiled. Minutes later, the two Tsurhadi frigates, sleek, ivory-colored vessels with long fins of communicative flair, moved into range of the Brightline. Behind them, the satellite drone activated, framing the silent ship with perfect symmetry. Wide angle, depth field adjusted. Color balancing enhanced the contrast. The white frigates gliding gracefully toward the dark, wounded human vessel, surrounded by floating corpses. The transmission went live. Now entering visual range, Reshna whispered into her interface. Overlay clean. Commentary ready. On 1,000 planets, the image spread. News feeds opened with heroic fanfare. Comment threads sparked in real time. On the bureaucratic decks of the inner corridors, officials watched with idle amusement between meetings. In lounges and estates of Tsurhadi aristocrats, eyes flicked to the screen with tepid interest. On the Brightline, there was no reaction. Colt walked the central spine corridor slowly, inspecting cable routing. His boots echoed softly in the freshly cleaned floor. Ellis Souza followed behind, still carrying a welding kit. Frigates coming in, Souza said. I know, Colt replied. They're not saying anything. Doesn't change anything. From the command deck, Tsukino looked at the proximity scans. They're holding distance, he said to Bram Kent. Not approaching, just watching. Bram shifted uneasily. Why send ships just to hover? Showmanship, Colt said from behind them, entering without warning. Tsukino turned. Should we respond? No. He stepped up to the forward viewport, gazing at the slow ballet of Tsurhadi maneuvering. They're not here for us. In a storage bay turned disposal chamber, Linnea Tades helped two others lift another corpse. Burned, twisted, armor melted into flesh. She hesitated at the hatch, breath catching. Jared stood beside her, grim-faced. Want me to? No, she said, steadying herself. She pressed the button. The body ejected, joining the orbiting procession. I hope someone's seeing this, Jared said. Someone is. The transmission continued, uninterrupted. A full 3 minutes of silence passed in the feed as the Brightline floated motionless, its hull patched, its lights dim but functional. No human moved within visible range, just the slow drift of dead Vargal bodies around a silent, immaculate vessel. Inside the Tsurhadi command center, Vadez frowned. Why aren't they transmitting? Because they don't need to, Orun replied softly. Look. Orun adjusted the sleeve of his robe, brushing imaginary dust from its cuff. They've already said everything. The frigate's external scans updated. Still no distress signals, no energy spikes, no damage signatures indicative of last-minute heroics. Just aftermath. Clinical. Finished. Do we proceed with messaging? Reshna asked, adjusting a lens parameter. Orun stared at the human ship. Yes. Begin the recorded statement. No response needed. Reshna began the performance, voice solemn, posture rehearsed. But even as he spoke, the dead floated in a ring around the Brightline like a message no one had expected. And the ship said nothing. The Tsurhadi frigates held formation as they closed the final kilometer to the Bright Line. The human vessel remained still, its engines dormant, its lights steady, its hull intact. No power surges, no threat displays, just cold silence and the slow drift of bodies. Aboard the flagship Imakul, Commander Kesvel Orun watched from the command sphere, arms folded behind his back. The telemetry feed scrolled across the holoscreen, environmental scans, radiation levels, EM signatures, all stable. "Still no transmission?" Orun asked without turning. "None, Commander," replied Ensign Hiran Vel, voice clipped and tense. "Their systems are fully operational, but they're not responding." "Fascinating," Orun murmured. "Focus the scan on debris drift." The holographic image of the Bright Line expanded. 42 life forms were marked, non-human. Their readings matched the Vargol: dense musculature, hybrid organic armor, biosignatures degraded by decompression. Some floated intact, their tendrils coiled in death. Others were burnt down to their spinal cores. One rotated slowly past the camera, split open clean through the sternum, neatly, as if dissected. 42 confirmed Vargol casualties, Vel reported. 0 human fatalities logged in external scans. "Begin analysis," Orun ordered. "Pull tactical logs from passive signature readings." What did they use to do this? Technician Cal Theros hunched over the console at the rear of the bridge. His pale fingers moved quickly across the interface, scrolling through volumes of residual thermal patterns, stress fractures, hull reconfigurations. Then he stopped. His face twitched. "Sir," Theros began, hesitating. "Speak." "Their ventral hull module. It was restructured. The plasma routing was redirected through the atmospheric filtration conduits. They've turned it into a short-burst cannon. Homemade, with scrap." Silence spread like a stain. Another technician across the chamber called out, "This can't be right. Surgical bots show neural interference patterns in their core logs. Someone rewrote their behavioral algorithms. They're functioning as contact mines. Surgical mines." "Impossible," another voice said. "There's no way they did all this in the time window, not without military AI." Theros swallowed hard. "They didn't use AI. They did it by hand." Commander Orun narrowed his eyes. He stepped forward, gaze fixed on the ship ahead. "Broadcast the full scan to the satellite," he said quietly. The transmission went global. From the satellite mounted behind the Tsurhadi formation, the feed broadcast live to over 600 worlds. Across the central systems of the Galactic Accord, embassy walls lit up with the image of the Bright Line, its hull calm, its signal silent, its surroundings littered with death. In the glass towers of the central spire on Raloth Prime, military analysts stared in silence as the broadcast zoomed on a spinning object floating just off the Bright Line's port side. A surgical scalpel, covered in frozen blood. It tumbled gently, catching the light in sharp glints. On the backwater colonies of the Valen Rim, grainy receivers buzzed with the delay feed. Farmers watched from meal tables, traders from behind dusty control panels. In taverns, silence fell as the footage repeated. Trap after trap, analyzed in Tsurhadi overlays, revealing the monstrosity of human improvisation. In an orbital base above Ankar 7, Fleet Marshal Harvin Quell stood motionless as the Bright Line's interior map appeared on screen, with highlights of weaponized stasis pods, improvised choke point fields, modified power lines. His adjutant leaned in. "Sir, that's a hospital ship." "I know," Quell said. In the Tsurhadi cultural complex on Calvej 4, dignitaries watching the stream began to fidget. The audio commentary from the Tsurhadi press envoy faltered mid-line. "A clear act of defensive desperation. But the precision suggests... Perhaps..." He stopped. Back aboard the Imakul, the bridge was flooded with stunned silence. Even Reshna, the ever-poised media envoy, lowered his stylus, eyes fixed on the screen. Technician Theros whispered under his breath, They used everything, every circuit, every screw. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate, timed. Another officer, Lieutenant Prahl, stood rigid at his post, scanning the data overlay. We've run drills on scenarios like this, fully trained Spec Ops units. None of them produce this kind of kill ratio. And these were medics, engineers. Commander Orun said nothing. His gaze remained locked on the bright line, now magnified to show the dorsal hull, undamaged and quiet. He noticed a long scratch across one of the rear stabilizers, repaired with what looked like a melted surgical tray. How long did they have? Orun asked quietly. Theros checked the signal logs. 57 minutes between the first attack and the second incursion. And they built all of this in that time? Yes, sir. Vel exhaled, almost a laugh. Sir, that's not possible. It happened, Orun replied. The satellite camera panned across the Brightline's bow, catching a new detail. A small burn mark beside the nameplate. Not a weapon strike. A branding mark, likely from a boarding hook that was later sheared off. It told a story. They were boarded. They let them in. And they survived. Across the galaxy, reactions multiplied. On Valyex, where the Kirin Merchant League met in session, broadcasts of the transmission were cut midstream. Officials cited signal irregularity. On Teleros II, 3 major universities issued joint statements demanding the footage be verified. If true, one scholar said live, it redefines human threat modeling. In private military channels, human fleet officers circulated the feed with encrypted comments. Who did this? Find that crew. That's not standard protocol. This was doctrine. Someone taught them. Among the public, footage went viral. The phrase Brightline method began trending on human forums. Clips looped endlessly. The surgical bot blinking red, the stasis pod igniting. The clean hallway before the corridor erupted into fire. No faces, no voices, just precision. And always, the silence of the Brightline. It remained motionless, hull reflecting the faint gleam of nearby stars, a ghost of efficiency in the void. Inside the Tsurhadi command deck, Reshnov finally spoke. This can't be the work of civilians. Orun turned to him slowly. Then perhaps they aren't. The broadcast continued. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just watched the Brightline hold position, perfectly still, as if it hadn't done anything remarkable at all. The lights inside the Brightline shifted from red to white. No alarm, no announcement, just the subtle change of tone across bulkheads and monitors, a return to standard operational hue. Colt Redhawk walked the upper corridor with measured steps, a diagnostic slate in one hand, its display pulsing with system readouts. The hull temperature had stabilized. Oxygen levels were back within acceptable parameters. Power routing was holding steady. His eyes scanned line by line, fingers occasionally tapping to dismiss a warning or confirm a repair log. Behind him, Nurse Linnea Tedesque sealed a side panel and pressed her palm against the wall to steady herself. She looked up and watched Colt continue forward, unhurried, as if it had all been routine maintenance. In the medical bay, Dr. Jonah Carr stood motionless beside a powered-down surgical table, staring at his own reflection in the polished metal. His face looked older, grayed around the eyes, jaw clenched, posture tight. Around him the ward was clean. Empty beds lined the walls, their emergency straps unfastened. Dried blood had been scrubbed away. The bots hovered in standby. He didn't speak. Jared Sloan sat near the bay entrance, elbows on his knees, breathing slow and steady. He turned his head as Bram Kent walked past without saying a word, datapad in hand. They exchanged a glance, wary, uncertain, and looked away. Sousa knelt alone in Corridor B, replacing a fuse in one of the sealed pressure doors. His hands trembled as he worked. When it was done, he stood and leaned against the bulkhead, eyes closed, listening. Not for alarms, for anything human. Nothing came. In the command center of the Imakul, Commander Kesvel Orun shifted his weight slightly on the observation platform. The image of the Brightline hung before him in high resolution. The ship remained still, its engines off, its systems quiet. Bodies continued to drift in slow arcs around the hull. The satellite feed remained live. "Have they responded?" Orun asked without looking. "Not yet," answered Ensign Vel. "They've received the signal. No reply." Orun tilted his head. "Try again, civil channel." Vel sent the ping. It echoed out, a low-frequency handshake repeating once every 8 seconds. No answer. Then, on the third cycle, the Brightline replied, "Audio only." Colt's voice came through, steady, unhurried, toneless. "Conducting internal repairs. No assistance required. Disregard collateral. Brightline out." The transmission cut. On the bridge of the Imakul, no one spoke. Reshna, seated beside the visual display suite, leaned forward. "They didn't even acknowledge us." "They're not interested in our presence," Orun said, "or our approval." Lieutenant Prahl tapped into the scan data. "They're powering minimal subsystems. Hull integrity is back to 82%. No external weapon signatures. Movement detected near engine relays. They're preparing to reposition." Reshna frowned. "After that, they're resuming course like nothing happened?" Vel shook his head slowly. "It doesn't fit any response profile. No post-battle trauma behaviors. No debrief attempts. No distress." Theros at his station whispered, "They never processed what happened." Orun narrowed his eyes at the screen. "No, they processed it. They just didn't linger." Back on the Brightline, Colt descended a ladder into the primary maintenance shaft. He passed 2 junior crew, Ellis Souza and Bram Kent, working silently to reconnect an auxiliary data trunk. He didn't stop, just nodded once. Souza watched him pass, then turned to Bram. "Did we actually win?" Bram stared at the exposed circuitry. "I don't know what we did." In the small med bay where Tadesse sat reorganizing supplies, her fingers paused over a scalpel. Its surface was clean, sterilized. But the image of it spinning in space, stained red and frozen, flickered in her mind. She put it back in the drawer. On the bridge, Tsukino sat in the comms chair, eyes tracking the external display. He'd been watching the Tsurhadi frigate since they arrived, expecting something, accusation, praise, anything. But they hadn't moved. Neither had the Brightline. Colt entered the bridge. He glanced at the scans, then moved to the helm and activated engine priming. The hum returned, quiet, deep in the hull. Tsukino broke the silence. "We're not going to explain?" Colt didn't answer. He keyed a control, and the ship slowly began rotating, reorienting toward its original trajectory. Tsukino leaned forward. "They're watching. They can watch." Outside, the Brightline shifted. Its engines came to life, blue light swelling within the containment rings. Slowly, deliberately, it moved past the remains of the Vargal ships, unshaken, unchanged. On the satellite feed, millions watched in stunned silence as the vessel pivoted away from the Tsurhadi frigates. Still no hail, no broadcast, no survivors waving, no lights blinking signals of gratitude or explanation. It was like watching a ghost slide back into its path. In the command center of the Imakul, Reshna's fingers hovered over the interface. "We still have the feed live. Do you want to transmit something?" Orun remained still. "No," he said. "Let it run." All across the vessel, the Tsurhadi staff took notes, timestamps, sensor sweeps, internal telemetry. Everything was archived, filed, sealed. They cataloged weapon patterns, heat anomalies, biometric movement sequences. They watched the humans clean blood like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Theros spoke without looking up. "They were never asking for help." Orun didn't reply. He just watched. And the Brightline flew on, Behind it, the Tsurhati ships remained in place, engines off, cameras rolling, watching a ghost that never looked back. The biometric query pulsed across the secure intelligence channel, flagged in red, then black, then red again. It reached the Tsurhati Defense Archive Corps beneath the obsidian towers of Ethrex Command, bypassing the usual buffers by executive override, authorized by Commander Kesvel Orun himself. In a cold chamber sealed behind 10 levels of encryption, the database stirred. Lines of restricted files flickered across ancient holographic terminals, each tagged with layered warnings and dead code identifiers. Few humans ever registered here. Fewer still had classifications this deep. The query: Colt Redhawk, ID unknown, request, origin, designation, military affiliations. It took 43 seconds to return. Inside the Immacule, on the intelligence deck now closed to all but top-level officers, Orun stood before a suspended display field as the first image stabilized. The man was younger, perhaps 3 decades prior. Same hard jawline, same steel-gray stare. His hair was cropped shorter, face smeared with desert grit. He wore no standard issue armor, just an adaptive cloak, scorched at the edges. Behind him, the ruins of what looked like a hostile world burned under a collapsed sky. His posture was upright, but his gaze, not victorious, just quiet, unmoving. The caption below read, Redacted. Operation, Obsidian Drift. Next photo. Colt in Arctic gear, standing alone in the wreckage of a downed dropship. 6 confirmed survivors marked in the corner, none visible. Colt had frost climbing his eyebrows. One arm was visibly splinted using broken hull struts. The date was 27 years ago. Redacted. Operation Helix Cradle. Then a document, heavily censored. Black lines ran across nearly every paragraph. What little remained legible included: subject operated under minimal to zero support conditions. No recorded use of armament. Mission completion rate 100%. Resource improvisation level classified. Subject's value in asymmetric engagements exceeds standard recon doctrine. Recommended: permanent off-record status. A quiet, involuntary exhale broke the silence in the room. Fleet strategist Tolvades stood behind Orun, arms crossed, eyes flicking through the data as more came through. Operations completed. 34 survival rate of team, AVG. 18% survival rate of subject. 100% armaments utilized. 0. Impossible, Vades muttered. Reshna, observing from the side console, whispered, These aren't missions. These are disappearances. Another file loaded. A psychological profile, mostly intact, marked with the Human Federation's extinct Internal Response Division insignia. Notes in English, roughly translated by the Tsurhati system. Subject exhibits traits consistent with controlled dissociation under pressure, capable of constructing tactical strategies mid-crisis without technological support. No emotional instability recorded, though subject's effect remains flat in debrief. Believed to possess eidetic recall of battlefield layout within minutes of exposure. There was no conclusion. Vel, now standing beside Theros, leaned in closer to the next visual. It was grainy footage, almost analog, pulled from a now decommissioned surveillance archive. Colt sat on a crate in a makeshift shelter, hands wrapped around a thermal pack, one eye swollen shut. A younger officer approached, speaking rapidly. Colt looked up, nodded once, then rose. No sound. But his eyes said everything. The file closed abruptly, replaced by one final dossier. X-Force Marine, Human Federation. Status: unaccounted for. Last recorded service entry, 22 years ago. Post-exit record, none. Below that, a single line appeared, unmoving. Recommended for missions requiring outcome without visibility. Orun stared for several seconds before he spoke. Why was he on a medical ship? No one answered. Theros searched again. No passenger logs mention him. No assignment orders. No medical registration. No mission entry. He wasn't listed on crew manifest. Not even on emergency transport authorizations. Valdez's voice turned sharp. "Stowaway." "No," Oren replied. "Not someone like this." Another report arrived via encrypted ping, a sublayer ping from an embedded observer attached to the Brightline's medical relief program. A copy of the last rotation order, submitted 3 months ago. 35 crew transfers. Colt Redhawk was not among them. "Then he boarded without protocol," Reshna said, deliberately. Oren turned away from the display and walked toward the wide glass viewport at the edge of the chamber. The Brightline, now several thousand kilometers ahead, was barely a glint against the black. "He was placed," Oren said. "By whom?" Valdez asked. Silence answered. Reshna's eyes returned to the last image on screen. Colt in jungle terrain, building a perimeter out of medical gurneys and broken emitter coils, the enemy bodies in the distance carefully arranged to distort heat scans. "There was no accident here," Arun said. "That crew survived because someone decided it mattered that they did." Theros spoke, his voice dry. "And we weren't prepared for that kind of someone." The room stayed quiet. The data closed itself, screen fading to black. The final document sealed behind executive clearance levels. Arun didn't even attempt to override. Then, with a wave of his hand, Arun dismissed the feed. "Mark the file. Reclassify the engagement as anomalous. Effective immediately." Valdez raised an eyebrow. "Cover it." "Not a cover-up," Oren said. "A delay." He turned toward the others. "Because the next time we see someone like him, we're going to need a different kind of plan." The last cable snapped into place with a soft metallic click. Sparks hissed briefly, then vanished. Colt Redhawk stood, tightening the final access panel along the Brightline's starboard intake system. Around him, the narrow engineering corridor smelled of disinfectant and solder. The lights were bright, stable. Everything was as it should be. He didn't say a word. A few meters away, Ellis Souza finished sealing a hatch with a magnetic lock, then stepped back, glancing in Colt's direction. No eye contact, no expectation of conversation, just acknowledgement that the task was done. Further down the corridor, Jared Sloan and Bram Kent ran final diagnostics on the auxiliary coolant system. Linnea Tedeschi moved through the lower deck in silence, tagging inventory crates and confirming medical stock. Dr. Jonah Carr stood over a console in the med bay, watching vitals. Stable, quiet, no alarms, no movement beyond what was necessary. The Brightline was back to standard operating condition, a hospital ship once again. But no one talked about the hull patches that had been welded with surgical blades, or the scorched areas they hadn't repainted, or the section of Corridor C4 that now sat sealed, forever charred, unspoken. Outside the hull, the Tsurhati frigates remained in position, motionless, watching. Their sleek white forms hung in the void like ceremonial statues, their observation lenses trained on the Brightline. None dared approach. Inside their command vessel Immacule, Commander Kesvel Orun stood at the center of the bridge, arms crossed, eyes locked on the image of the human ship hovering in the dead center of his tactical screen. No weapons were raised, no shields powered, and yet no one moved forward. "All systems operational," reported Ensign Vel. "They're ready to jump." "They haven't signaled," said Tol Valdez from behind, voice measured. "They don't need to," Oren replied. He watched as the Brightline rotated slightly, adjusting its trajectory. The movement was deliberate, precise, the kind of course correction that required total engine recalibration, not a maneuver made in haste, but one chosen with intent. Reshna, seated at the broadcast station, leaned in. "The satellite is still live, recording continuous footage." Orun nodded. "Leave it. Do not cut the feed." On screen, the Brightline's engines began to glow with a low, steady pulse. No heat flare. No sonic burst. The vibration was minimal, contained within the stabilization buffers, like a pulse returning to resting rhythm. Inside the ship, Colt moved toward the command deck. The crew parted as he passed, Souza stepping back without being told, Tsukino rising from the comm chair. Colt sat without instruction, scanned the monitors, then toggled a switch on the console to realign the drive core's navigation input. No sound in the room but the soft hum of readiness. Linnea Tedeschi stepped in quietly, standing near the wall. She looked at Tsukino, then to Colt. No one spoke. At the far end of the bridge, the main view screen showed the path ahead. Open space, calculated route, no interference. A simple medical jump, scheduled, predictable. Colt tapped the comm once, brought it online, and spoke into the channel. His voice was even, unaffected. Routine. This is Colt Redhawk of the USV Brightline. Stopped for repairs. Proceeding to destination, Medical Station Yaloon. No further issues to report. He released the comm button. No answer came. None was expected. The engines deepened their resonance. The drive core shifted alignment. The ship vibrated once, subtle, like the breath before a word. And then the Brightline vanished into the void. No flash, no distortion, no ripple in the fabric of space. Just absence. On the bridge of the Imakul, the Tsurhadi crew stared in silence as the tactical display recalibrated. The dot was gone. The transmission feed cut itself. Orun stood still. Valdez exhaled slowly. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't need it, Orun replied. Reshna reached toward the terminal to close the last file, but hesitated. Should we classify this broadcast? Orun didn't turn. No, he stepped down from the platform. Archive it. And the observation screen went dark. Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Hope you had a great time with the story. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really makes a huge difference to the channel. And hey, I've got something else for you. I've chosen another story that I think you'll really enjoy. Just click the card right here, or hit this one to jump into the full playlist. See you in the next one.